All right, all right. Welcome to Sabs podcast. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. My special guest tonight is Kshama Sawant. She is a city council member of Seattle. And earlier this year, Kshama Sawant announced that she would not be seeking re-election and instead working on a new endeavor, which is called Workers Strike Back, in an effort to help unionize workers. Welcome back, Kshama.
So nice to be here. Thank you for having me, Sabby.
All right, so Kshama, I know that you actually started a podcast called On Strike, and I want to go ahead and bring that up on the screen here because I like what you guys are doing over there. And this is you and Bia, and I really like this because I feel like now we actually do have a platform that is focused on covering these labor actions that are happening all across the country.
Yeah, that's very important. And at the same time, I want to also share with your viewers that we obviously we are covering workers who are on strike, and it has been an incredible period actually of a resurgence of the strike action. But at the same time, I want to make sure your viewers know it's not only about strike actions. For example, the episode that we released this week, actually just yesterday, is about the Israel-Palestine conflict, and I hope the people who are watching this will check it out because we have an analysis that, as you know yourself, Sabrina, from being a left podcaster, that it's very hard to find this kind of analysis, and it's basically non-existent in the mainstream corporate media. So hopefully it's going to be useful for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great. One of the things I noticed, you also are doing interviews on this podcast as well.
Yeah, we're trying very hard to bring in the voice of ordinary people and of people who are playing a leadership role in various struggles. And I don't mean the many of the union bureaucrats who are actually maybe not playing a good role and maybe even holding struggle back, but I mean rank and file worker leaders. So for example, one episode that we did recently, which was really quite inspiring, and I felt myself inspired by talking to the worker leaders, is one, it's a local, they're both local struggles, but they're both very important. One is the workers at local Pacific Northwest chain of organic grocery stores called PCC, and they're all members of UFCW 3000, which is the biggest local, I believe, biggest union local in Washington state. And these rank and file workers are trying to lead a left caucus inside the union because they can see that that leadership is really missing. And then across the coast in New Jersey, nurses at the Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital have been on a courageous strike for several weeks now, and they and this is not only rank and file leaders, but also the elected leadership of the union is playing a very important role in the leadership of this strike action. But it's important to see that these may be localized strike actions, but they're very important because it shows one, all that is stacked up against workers and what workers need to do to overcome those obstacles.
Well said. And I also saw that you had an interview with Dr. Cornell West, and he talked about his campaign. And I know that Cornell West has also been on the ground for some of these strikes that have been happening across the country. One of the things that I think was really interesting to me, and I talked about this last night as well, was the issue with Peter Dow. So I interviewed Peter Dow about the concerns that people had in reference to him joining that campaign. And there was something that you said at the end of that interview that I think it really made a lot of sense, is that why would you add someone who basically very shortly is coming from the Democratic Party, just came from a Democrat campaign, even though Peter has moved further left in his political ideology. He just came from Marianne Williamson's campaign, which was a part of the Democratic Party. And in a sense, it almost seems like, why take that risk? And I don't know if you've heard the news, but it was announced the other day that Peter Dow has now resigned from that campaign. And now a lot of people are starting to feel, hopeless again, because they're like, what has happened now? And I think that there's been a lot of things that have happened in particular with that campaign. But the moment it was announced that Peter Dow was resigning, some people have made the comment that, well, he's done his job. He's ruined the campaign. I want to get your perspective about that.
I think it's important to look at overall the trajectory of the campaign, and I think that is what is worrying to some people who are watching this. Who are watching this at close quarters. And I want to, respond to that, and then zoom out and talk about what this campaign could mean to ordinary people who are not watching every political development closely, but overall do care about what options are available and where there is a real possibility for building a struggle. So, in terms of the people who are watching the campaign closely, I think it's understandable for a lot of people to feel like it's going from one thing to another that's probably not going well. We disagree. I mean, Socialist Alternative and we disagree about, and we've said this publicly, about the decision to leave the Green Party, and whatever the differences might be, and we have disagreements with the Green Party too. It's not so much about that, but it's about ballot access. I know you've said that. Other podcasts have said that as well, on the left. And I think that was a quite big question that emerged to us. Now, I don't know if that was Cornell West's decision or Peter Dow's decision. At the end of the day, of course, it goes to Cornell West because he's the candidate, and it's not like they have a political organization as we do in Socialist Alternative, where the elected leadership of Socialist Alternative together makes decisions with membership approval. We have membership voting on every major decision that needs to be taken after discussion and debate. So we have that genuinely democratic process. I don't believe that that's nothing like that, that anything like that exists on that campaign. So I don't know which individuals were involved, but regardless of who was responsible for that decision, it just didn't make sense to us that they would let go of the ballot access that was available. Because at the end of the day, it's not so much about this question as to what role can a left campaign play in the presidential election year, does not actually stop at, is Cornel West a genuine person with genuine ideals and integrity? I think the answer to all of those questions is yes. I mean, I genuinely believe that he has has moral and political integrity and wants to uh, use his potential for the good. But I don't think that's how, or that's like a limited way of framing the question. Really, the question is, how can a campaign, or a left campaign that is supposed to be challenging the Democratic and Republican candidates, be an alternative to the Biden Trump agenda? And the answer to that question has to also depend on whether you're concretely on the ballot on state after state after state, because that is what makes you a concrete threat to the Biden re-election campaign, to the Democratic Party apparatus. So if you're in the you say good things in the abstract, it's not at all the same thing as actually becoming a threat to Biden. And that is where we saw Bernie Sanders fail. He of course ran a very strong campaign, on demands. It electrified people, especially in 2016. We saw tens of millions of ordinary people, including in the so-called deep south, which there's a temptation for the left to just forget that there are just masses of working people there who will agree with us on working class demands, and Bernie Sanders' campaign brought that forward. But at the end of the day, when he was pushed out of the Democratic primary, he decided to just drop out, not run as an independent. And then on top of all that, he shamefully, unfortunately, also endorsed the Democratic candidate, whether it was Clinton or Biden. So that was the problem, not running till the very end, which is what makes you a threat to the Democratic establishment. So when that component is missing, I think strategically it really weakens the campaign. And as far as Peter Dow's decision, I mean, his decision to resign is concerned, that just makes me concerned about the status of the campaign itself. We need a strong campaign. I mean, think about it, right? You have the Ukraine war. You have now this brutality being unleashed by the Israeli state and their military against the people of Gaza and the occupied West Bank, but obviously with both the political support and the enormous military funding from US capitalism, from US imperialism. Imagine the value of having one left anti-war candidate, which Cornel West has. I mean, he has spoken very clearly against the wars, but imagine the value of that. And if we had a strong campaign running, that would make a huge difference.
I agree. And you mentioned something about Bernie Sanders choosing not to make that decision to, you know, move away from the Democratic Party. I really do think back to 2016, and I realize if Bernie Sanders would have responded to the Draft Bernie campaign. Now, there's issues with the People's Party. Obviously, they don't have ballot access either. But let's say it wasn't the People's Party. Let's say it was just someone else that said, Bernie, we want you to start the third party movement. If that would have happened back in 2016, think about where we would be today in reference to a third party movement. So that's the thing. Like, I think people are like, well, you can't just change the system overnight. No, you can't. But that was a couple of years ago. But I think we would be further along now if
Yeah.
Bernie Sanders would have made that decision.
Yeah, exactly. And what we were saying also was, obviously that is the first step, to run all the way as an independent and be a real pole of attraction for ordinary people who are fed up with Biden, and obviously also understand that the Republican Party and especially the Trump agenda represents a real danger to US society. And then so not doing that is a problem. But what we were saying was not only just doing that, but using that as a platform for launching a political organization that can have a life outside of the presidential election year. So I totally agree with you, Sabrina, that if not only had he run all the way, but had he helped launch a nationwide organization or movement like that, that could have provided a real platform to then build on. And then we would have had a real momentum. We could have had a real momentum around that. One thing to add, though, in terms of the Cornell West campaign is that uh, even now, even with all the deficiencies that we have seen, the reality is that if you talk to ordinary people, not people who are just politically tuned to every development, but who understand that their lives are on the line, that contrary to the message of Bidenomics, their lives are not getting better, their lives have gotten worse, with the COVID programs being withdrawn, with student debt payments being now back on the agenda. Since October, people, since this month, people have to pay those payments again every month. With all of that, I think people understand, you don't have to be a politically savvy person to understand that, yeah, there is a real value to having a left campaign. And so people who haven't heard about Peter Dow or Cornel West's decision about the Green Party, they are still very excited about the Cornel West campaign. They are excited about having somebody and a real platform to talk about Medicare for all, to talk about a $25 an hour minimum wage, have an anti-war message. And so I mean, my message would be to the Cornel West campaign is that even now it is really, really important for the campaign, I would say, to have a serious strategy team, strategy um, sort of organization to be brought together. And I've suggested that to Cornel West himself, and also when Peter Dow was the manager, I suggested that to him as well, that we should have a real strategy team so that we can really help the campaign run in a very effective way. So just if you look at just what ordinary people are thinking, there is real desire to have a real left campaign.
That's right. So one question I do have about running as an independent, because someone was asking me this question the other day. The difference, I think, if you are running in the Green Party, if you lose, you still have that energy with the Green. So it's like you brought people over to the Green Party who may have otherwise never joined the Green Party, if that makes sense. So you can continue fighting some of those efforts through the Green Party, even during, the off season when it's not election season. But now running as an independent, and this is the question I keep asking people, if you're running as an independent and you don't win, where does all that energy go afterwards? And I think that is something that does worry me, because I saw that happen to Bernie Sanders. All this energy went into the Bernie campaign. And when Bernie suspended his campaigns, the energy it had nowhere else to go. So a lot of people just basically, folded their hand and said, okay, I'm just going to vote for the corporate Democrat. So in this particular situation with Cornel West running as an independent, where is all that energy going to go if Dr. West doesn't win?
Well, but just to be clear, in terms of reality, we don't expect him to win, as in we don't expect that a left campaign can win the presidency right now. That's not on the cards. And if that were, it would be it. If that had been the case, it would be on the back of a major, unprecedented mass movement and upheaval in the nation, because you can't just have somebody who's genuinely anti-corporate, anti-capitalist, elected at the presidential level without that kind of uprising actually already in the making. It's not, you can't just do that automatically. So I think we have to be, just in terms of having a reality check, we're not going to uh, we weren't talking about him winning, but what we were talking about is extremely important, which is exactly the points that you and I were making just now, which is that using the campaign as a vehicle to, first of all, really change the dynamic in the presidential election year. Put the Biden and the Trump campaigns on notice that using that as a vehicle to expose the hollowness, first of all, of Bidenomics. Really, ordinary people, go and look at how tens of millions of Americans are living. They're suffering right now. And not to mention the blood that Biden has on his hands with the support for the Ukraine war and the Israel attack on Palestine. And let's be clear, all of this is happening in the context of the new Cold War. In other words, the war in Ukraine is not about self determination, as Biden claims. His whole idea of democracy versus autocracy is now in tatters. It's very visible. How can you say that you're supporting Ukraine in the name of self determination, and then here you are funding this bloodshed in Gaza and the occupied West Bank with billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars of US money? So, what does that indicate about the complete hypocrisy of this idea? So, in other words, the what's happening in Israel and the US capitalist class's support for that exposes that all of this is happening in the context of the new Cold War. And so, having a campaign that is exposing all these realities and energizing working people to fight for something concrete, and obviously being anti-war is one thing, but as I said, it's also about putting forward $25 an hour, Medicare for all, supporting the union drives, talking about the haves and have nots. How is it that in this moment you have poverty increasing in the richest country in the world, and then you have a corporation like Amazon that has just posted unprecedented profits? And then you look at the difference between CEO salary and ordinary worker salary. Again, that's unprecedented. So if you look at all these issues that are burning issues for people's lives, it really would make a difference. But as far as what in terms of the party that you're talking about, the third party or a party for working class, I mean, I just have to be honest, like, I don't believe that the Green Party is going to be that vehicle, because so far what we have seen over the decades is that it's important that the Green Party has developed the ballot access, and I think it is also really, it was really positive, and we welcomed this decision. It was really positive when the Green Party leaders embraced Cornell West's candidacy and said, yes, you should run for Green Party candidacy. In fact, all of that unfolded at the Worker Strike Back launch in New York City, as you know, and you covered that at that time. So all of that is important, but I think that we need a new party for working people, because we need a part. What the kind of party we are talking about is not something that emerges just in the presidential election year and runs electoral campaigns. We're talking about a party which has real life in the experiences of the working class of America, which is based in the working class struggle that is happening, and as part of that struggle, builds a membership, working class membership that can run its own candidate on a program that is voted on by the entire membership, that's discussed, debated, and voted on by the membership. So we're talking about a really dynamic organization that is needed. Obviously, it's not going to happen on day one, which is why such campaigns are important. So on the one hand, we don't believe that this is about winning, as in actually winning the presidential election, but because that's not on the cards. But what is possible and what needs to be done urgently is to build a campaign, use the presidential election year to build a campaign that could actually put forward the beginnings of what we need, which is a new party for the working class. And that would require mass rallies. That was one of the questions I asked Cornel West, is how come you haven't done organized mass rallies yet? Because by October of 2015, in that year, heading into 2016, Bernie Sanders had already attracted 100,000 people at his mass rallies, and more people than that already knew the program he was running on. So I think that's the kind of vision we have to put forward, and there is real opening for that. I mean, look at the civil war and crisis inside the Republican Party, right? Look at the abysmal poll numbers for support for the Democratic Party, for Biden, for Democrats themselves. You look at the numbers. The majority Democrats are saying we don't want to send money, military aid to Israel to attack the people on Palestine. I mean, these are incredible. This is an incredible glimpse into the consciousness of the working class in America. In other words, there is a huge opening to do all of that, but we don't know if that potential is going to be realized. And I have to say, I don't think it is. It was a good idea for Cornell West to. I mean, in my view, make all kinds of blunders. And one is, uh, rather than organize the first mass rally. I mean, let's be clear: they have not organized one mass rally to date. And when I say mass, I mean a rally that is meant for working people, not $1,000 a plate dinner, which was one of the events they organized. They got a lot of pushback, and then they were forced to change the character of the event, but only marginally. At the end of the day, it was not what I would call a mass rally. A fancy fundraiser is not what we're talking about. Remember, Bernie Sanders ran his campaign and raised millions of dollars through taking small donations from ordinary people, and that's how we have raised money as well. We are leaving City Hall this year with having won 4 elections, never being defeated, despite all the corporate money and all the Democratic Party establishment opposition against us. And why did we do that? Was because we really focused on the concrete demands that we could help fight to win, which we have a long track record of. But in the campaigns themselves, we ran them in similar to Bernie, and in fact, we started before Bernie, where we were very clear. Our support lies in the grassroots. And the other thing I should mention, unfortunately, is the billionaire donation that Cornell West took. It was just not okay, and I did not think it was a good idea for him to then um, try to justify it as well, because it's wrong.
Yeah, I think there's a number of things that could be improved. And for people who are not aware, like for example, with yourself, Kshama, like I remember the first time I interviewed you, you said you didn't want to be a politician. Like you were actually selected by your organization. But this is the thing I want people to understand. Let's say Kshama did not win when she ran for City Hall. People would have still had something to go back to because you're coming from the organization Socialist Alternative, and you guys were already doing the fight on the ground with the workers, like the fight for 15, for Amazon, all those kind of things. People still had something to return to. And I agree in reference to the mass rallies. I'm kind of surprised by that too. We were talking about this the other night on call in. People were asking, like, where's the rallies? Because Marianne Williamson is holding rallies, RFK Jr. and all his craziness, he is holding rallies, and so people are really desperate for that. Like they want that. They want that type of energy, and I don't understand why that has not happened yet. So I agree with you on that.
Yeah, and if I can just clarify, yeah, I mean, just in terms of winning and not winning, just to be clear, it's not that we are opposed to winning. Obviously, we want to win, and if you look at the example of Seattle that you mentioned, Sabrina, is that uh, yes, even if we had not won for example, the very first campaign that we won in 2013, and in fact, to be honest with you, when we launched it, we didn't have a prediction that we were going to win. It was a very, very, very long shot. We were basically, that's how the Democrats, and that's how my opponent at the time, they were very visibly condescending and disdainful towards us. They were like, who are you, you young people out of nowhere, some riff-raff organization. That's the outlook they had. But we were able to win because of the absolute the seriousness with which we take any fight. And first of all, we understand that it's a fight. It's a fight against the democratic establishment, against the elite, against the Chamber of Commerce, and that is the basis on which we won. Remember, our flagship demand was $15 an hour, and then we were able to win that demand actually, and it was historic within 6 months of me taking office. So my point being that whenever and wherever there is a real shot to actually win elections and then demonstrate what a working class elected office actually means, absolutely we should do that. But the reason I'm emphasizing the larger project of a new party for the working class and the kind that I described is because look at what's happened with the whole array of DSA electeds around the nation. 150, 200 electeds, and you constantly hear this refrain from a lot of people on the left, like, oh, let's get elected, let's get elected. Yeah, okay, yes, I agree, but what are you getting elected, and who is getting elected, and on what basis, and what is their trajectory going to be once they get elected? So how is it that these 150, 200 candidates have been elected, and yet our example in Seattle stands out as a beacon? I mean, when we were first elected, just to share a story, a reporter asked me, in 5 years from now, what would you consider a sign of real success for the movement that you're trying to build? And I would say, I said at that time that if 5 years from now we are still talking about my election and what we did as the thing to hold on to, then it would be an indication that we haven't gone as far as we need to, because there should be many examples of this kind. So here we are, nearly 10 years since that story that I'm relating, and yet even now our example stands out. And why is that? It's because it's a rare example of what actually needs to be done when you win office, and also the basis on which you win elected office. And the bedrock of all of that is having our organization Socialist Alternative. And so I'm just translating that to a bigger sphere and saying that, extrapolating that, what we need is a new party for the working class of that kind. Obviously it won't be Socialist Alternative. We would like to be a part of that new party.
I want to pivot just a second to what's happening in reference to Israel and Palestine. I want to go to some of the protests for people who are not aware. Right now in New York City, there's actually Jewish Voices for Peace. It says Jews calling for a ceasefire now have taken over NYC's Grand Central Station. In the name of Palestinians of Gaza, we say not in our name. And I just want to show this really quick. So if those of you who are in New York City, just FYI, this is happening where you are right now. So obviously, as you can see, Kshama, a lot of people, and I think it really speaks volumes when you have people who are Jewish come out and protest in support of the Palestinian struggle. And it's not even just, Jewish Voices for Peace. Also, a lot of students have been hitting the streets protesting. I covered two of the protests that happened here in Boston. This was organized by young people. Like, a lot of the younger people are putting all of this together, but it's not even just happening in the United States. It's also across the world. And I want to get your perspective about this, because I noticed once the protests started to really increase globally, I noticed mainstream media, all of a sudden, it's like they got that push to have to talk about what happened to the Palestinian people, meaning going all the way back to the history 75 years ago, which they were not talking about initially. Initially, they were talking about the attack that was on the state of Israel, and just kind of referring to Hamas as all of the Palestinian people, which is obviously not the case. Do you think like these mass protests that have been happening globally are having an impact on the narrative somewhat, so to speak?
There's no doubt, absolutely, these mass protests are crucial. They are part of the backbone of why you're seeing a real pressure on corporate media. As you said, they all of a sudden I mean, I think overall, I would say they are still, the narrative is still one that dehumanizes the Palestinian people. But you're absolutely right that there has been a shift. They've been forced to make that shift because in response to these protests, and we're seeing that more and more people are coming out in protest. And it's very clear that if the invasion, I mean, if the ground invasion happens, and if there is real escalation, and I feel like already, of course, the bloodshed is unspeakable, but even compared to that, if that were escalated by the Israeli military, it is clear that there will be a huge increase in the protests. And so the fact that we are having that kind of outcry in the United States, and for the most part led by just young people, there were walkouts here in Seattle as well, in multiple schools, including the University of Washington. And young people are saying that we don't want this bloodshed, and we want the US military funding to Israel to be ended. So I think there is the pressure from the protests. And if you look at it from the standpoint of the Biden regime and the interest of US imperialism, they for them it has been crucial to try and keep public opinion pro Israel. And I think that we also on the left have to be sober, that I think the majority is still pro Israel in the US if you look at the polls. But there is a real break from what you saw in the past, in the sense that young people are much less inclined to be supportive of the Israeli attacks against Gaza than in the past. So there is a shift there as well. So we have to be both sober and also draw hope from the changes that we have seen over the years. But as far as the Biden regime is concerned, where this is, as I said before, it's happening in the context of the new Cold War, where every war or every development for them is like a consideration of a chess move, because they are every side, both the Putin and Xi Jinping side, the China and Russia side, the bloc, and the US bloc, they're both just as cynical. I mean, they represent different sections of the ruling classes under capitalism and imperialism. Neither of them has any interest in saving the lives of ordinary people, whether it is um, ordinary Israelis who were killed by the Hamas attack, or the much more disproportionate attack on Palestinians. They don't care about ordinary people on any side. They don't care about ordinary Ukrainians or ordinary Russians. So that's why it's so important for working people to build an international anti-war movement on a working class basis. But as far as the Biden regime is concerned, none of these protests are helping, because it is pushing against what he wants, what US imperialism wants, which is a carte blanche for carte blanche support for Israel. And I think that also has a lot to do with why the ground invasion hasn't happened yet, because I think it's not exactly in their interest, in terms of their geopolitical and strategic interest in the Cold War, to have that happen. They're already dealing with a war on the Ukraine front, so they're nervous about having to deal with war on two fronts, because they understand, as we do, that this is, if that war escalates, it's not just going to be Israel and then Palestinians dealing with it. It's going to be a regional war, very likely. Already there have been skirmishes with Israeli rockets going and hitting Hezbollah sites in Lebanon. There have been attacks against the airports in Aleppo and Damascus in Syria. And then there's Iran. So it's a very sensitive situation.
I agreed. Another thing I've noticed too, Barack Obama recently made a statement, which I'm still kind of shocked by this. Of course, he said the usual phrase that Israel has a right to exist. But another thing that he said in his statement is that there needs to be some type of solution to, the Israeli, what the Israeli people want and what the Palestinian people want. And then he went on to say that there needs to be a goal towards self-determination for the Palestinian people. And I was very shocked that he said that. And I have to wonder, is it because of the protests that kind of makes people have to acknowledge like the history and what has happened to the Palestinian people? I don't know what else it could be, to be honest, but I was surprised that he said that.
I think a lot of what I was actually just referring to, I think applies to Obama as well. I mean, as you said, let's be clear. This is Barack Obama. We're talking about the deporter in chief here. So let's be clear. And this was his presidency was also part of the whole continuation of the war on Afghanistan. And remember, he ran his first campaign with the promise that he was not going to uh, do a troop search in Afghanistan. And what did he do as one of his first actions? He did a troop search in Afghanistan. So you're talking about we're talking about a succession of warmongering presidents across the Democratic and Republican parties, because whatever their differences may be, ultimately they are both parties of US imperialism, and continuing war has been, part of that agenda. So in that sense, I don't really put much truck by what Obama is saying, but I think what, in order to explain why he's saying that, one is that for the ruling class, American ruling class, I think they, as I said before, they have their own reasons to be nervous, and it's not because they care about the blood that is being spilled of ordinary people, especially poor and working class people. It's because they are worried about the price they're going to have to pay in terms of their reputation, because if their main agenda, which it is to beef up support for their bloc against the China Russia bloc, then this kind of um, event where it's clear that this is mighty Israeli military is just bombarding the hell out of ordinary people in Palestine, in Gaza, and in the occupied West Bank, where people are just being just decimated,
Mhm.
and just the death count of children is enough to send absolute chills down your spine. And so in that context, the whole idea of getting support from the global south, from neo-colonial countries, is really very, very difficult for US imperialism. So that's what they're trying to contain. They're trying to contain that damage. And as I said, that is part of why they as I said, they don't care about ordinary people, but from their agenda standpoint, it was important that they slowed down the potential for ground invasion, because it seemed like it was going to be imminent, but then it has slowed down. And so I think getting Obama to speak about this is part of that agenda, sort of doing a little bit of both sides kind of thing to calm things down a little bit, just so that they can keep it manageable. And if you look at the actual words that he has used, for example, he said that ignoring the human cost of war could ultimately backfire.
Yep.
So those were his words. So in other words, what he's saying, if you read between the lines, it's not so much that he's dripping with compassion for people who are losing their families. It's more that, well, it could backfire against the US imperialism.
That's very, very well put. I think another thing that's been interesting too about all of this is that I just saw a poll earlier this morning that said that Joe Biden is down 11 points among
Mhm.
Democrats, 11 points in 1 month. And we all know what started this month, right? So we're going back to October 7th. And
Yeah.
so this issue with Israel and Palestine, which a lot of people told us, those of us over at RBN, that this is not an important issue. They've been telling us this for years, by the way. They said most Americans don't care about this. This is not an important issue. It turns out it actually is an important issue. So it's just,
Yeah, exactly.
but 11 points in 1 month is very
It,
telling. And I think
it's
it's just,
dramatic. Yeah, it's dramatic.
mhm.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to see what you think about. What do you think about in reference to the presidential election for 2024? Everybody else has kind of, decided to run outside of the two-party system. So like RFK Jr. was running through the Democratic Party, and then he realized they were trying to change the rules on him and Marianne and decided to run as an independent. But except for Marianne is still running in the Democratic Party. I don't see the value in it just because of the fact that there are no debates. Like we all know the Democratic Party isn't going to have debates with Joe Biden. And I thought about the fact, if Marianne were to run, change her mind, I don't think she's going to, but change her mind and run as an independent, then you would have three well-known people, Marianne Williamson, RFK Jr., and Cornell West, running outside the duopoly. And I do feel like that will take some of the attention away from Joe Biden and more focus on, oh, there's other options out there. And I wanted to hear your perspective about that.
I think that if it's clear that RFK Jr. understood that he would get much bigger, he would be able to have a much bigger impact outside of the Democratic Party. And in fact, if you look at the recent poll numbers, it is actually a pity that the Cornell West campaign isn't really hitting their stride, because you can see RFK polling at double-digit numbers, and Cornell West, I think, has dipped since his last high of 7% or whatever. And so it's it really shows you the opening for independent candidates, that the amount of gain that RFK has made by running independent. In fact, if you look at the super PAC that's pulling for him, I think the statistics are that they were able to raise millions of dollars. I can't remember exactly how much, but a million, I think $11 million, something insane like that, within the first 6 hours of him declaring that he's running independent. So that's the kind of opening there is for candidates running independent. We have to be clear, however, we have to be very, very clear on the left. We can't have illusions on someone like RFK. Look at his position on the war from Israel against Palestinians. It is an unspeakable position that there is no way to make any kind of peace or conciliation with that position. And then furthermore, it's not like he's running a very, very clear pro working class campaign, but he has an unfortunate position on this issue. It's not like that. And if you look at the polls again, and what electoral analysts are pointing towards, what they're saying is that it could still go either way. It depends on which way RFK pivots and on what issue, and there's still a long way to go. But at this moment, for the most part, what they are saying is that he is more of a threat to Trump than to Biden, and that should tell us that this is not a campaign for the left. He is really attracting a lot of. He is running not a working class campaign, but he's sort of running a campaign that is attracting people from the right, and that is pretty dangerous. And so we have to be very clear about the nature of his campaign. And as far as Marianne Williamson is concerned, I think that the reason, I don't know, it's not something that I have studied very carefully, but because I don't think it is worth it. I don't think it's a serious campaign. But I think that the reason she has not moved is probably because she's getting what she wants through just running this campaign. I can't see that she's running in any, as I said, in any serious way. So it wouldn't make sense for her to make a shift to independent, because when you shift to an independent campaign, like RFK, for example, your goal is that it's going to be a credible campaign. And by credible, I want to be clear, what I mean is not a campaign that I support, but in terms of how seriously and professionally you're running, that is going to make a difference. And so um, and you can see, I actually, there are other fundraising numbers as well. In addition to the $11 million that his PAC raised within 6 hours of going independent, he's also, I think, since then, very soon after that, raised $9 million. The campaign itself raised $9 million, I'm sure, and this was days ago. So now it has probably gone much farther. So if you compare that to um, the Cornell West campaign, I don't think that those Cornell West campaign's numbers at this moment anyway, fundraising numbers would rise to that. So I think, overall, just my political opinion is it's really unfortunate that the West campaign hasn't made that kind of strides that RFK has. And as I said, it's going to be very confusing for a lot of young people potentially, because RFK might appear as something that a lot of young people want to see an anti-establishment candidate. But if you don't have a clearly left anti-establishment candidate, that can point in a very bad direction.
Right. All right, Kshama, I have one more question for you. This is in reference to workers strike back. So there was an announcement recently from Nina Turner. I'm not sure if you saw this, but the announcement was launching another like workers organization called this one, We Are Somebody. And I remember like just playing the announcement video on here and just thinking to myself, like, don't we already have that with workers strike back? And so viewers had questions. And one of the questions was, in the beginning with workers strike back, was there any type of communication from like Nina or any type of interest from her to be involved in Worker Strike Back? Because a lot of us just kind of feel like now, like it doesn't make sense to start a separate worker organization because now it's like splitting resources.
No, there was no communication. We found out from their social media announcement, just like anyone else found out about it. And I don't think it's a coincidence. I mean, I think that it has been launched because Worker Strike Back has been launched, and Worker Strike Back is actually, I mean, it's still a very small organization, but it is something that's nationwide, which is one of the reasons we did decided not to run again for re-election in Seattle, but instead wanted to raise our sights to building something nationally. And it's not so even though it's small, it is still it has made a mark on some of the on the minds of some of the most politically advanced rank and file workers nationwide. And on strike, the broadcast that you mentioned earlier, that's a part of the project of the Worker Strike Back movement. It's not we're not like armchair commentators. We are in the movement. Many of our activists, Worker Strike Back activists, have actually been at the picket lines at UAW, at the nurses strike, and here if the grocery workers. So we are people, we are ordinary working class people who are in the movement, and we are building Worker Strike Back, and we are running the on strike broadcast. And so it is most certainly it's in response to Worker Strike Back. But one thing what I will say is that I mean, yes, if even if it were the case, this is not the case, but I'm just saying hypothetically, even if it were the case that it was some sort of genuine initiative, but it was started as a separate thing from Worker Strike Back, then you're totally right that it would still be bad, because that's splitting resources, and that doesn't help working people. That doesn't help the union movement. We need to be united. If we're doing the same thing, then why have different organizations join ours? So yes, that is true. But what I'm going to say is that it's even worse than that, because it is not even meant to be, oh, let's do the same thing that Workers Strike Back is doing. Let's just split resources because maybe we want credit and we don't want Workers Strike Back to get credit. Even as I said, even that would be bad enough, because careerism is a toxic factor inside social movements. We shouldn't have that approach. But I'm saying that it's even worse than that, in the sense that it's not like they are trying to do what Workers Strike Back is doing. It's ultimately, I think, meant to be of a framework for co-opting workers away from Workers Strike Back, and then sending them towards just raising funds for the Democratic Party. Because if you look at what Nina Turner announced, all they did is announce their fundraising apparatus, and that's connected to Act Blue. So it could not get more Democratic Party embedded, Democratic machinery embedded than that. But aside from that, they haven't really announced any other initiative. It's not like, we Worker Strike Back activists have been at the UAW pickets. We've not run into anyone from their organization. It's not like they're actually building the rank and file movement inside the labor movement. It's not like they're doing anything. It's meant to co-opt, and co-opt means it's the death knell. Ultimately, this is what shows that the Democratic Party is a graveyard for social movements. They never actually want to support, or let alone lead, the action that working people need. But what they will do is, when there's a genuine threat like Worker Strike Back, then they will try to co-opt it, not with the interest of running something good, but with the intent of just killing the momentum. And to what extent they succeed, of course, that depends on not just Worker Strike Back and how well we do, but on objective conditions, how much workers are clear about the role, and so on and so forth. So it remains to be seen how things work out. But I'm just talking about my sense of their intention, and it's really sad. I mean, it's unfortunate that even maybe people who maybe understand the character of that organization have supported it. Like, I saw Sarah Nelson, the president of the Flight Attendants Association, did an ad, promotional ad for them. In fact, it's interesting that in that video she says this organization will help you strike back or help workers, something like that. So I'm like, well, that's exactly what we are. So I really would appeal to leaders in the labor movement to understand that this is actually not the way to go, because it's so insidious that it's the repeat of what has not worked for workers. What has not worked for workers is putting our faith in the Democratic Party machine.
All right. Well said, Kshama. Well, Kshama, before you go, anything you have coming up you want to announce?
Mainly just wanting people to check out our broadcast work on strike, and we will be on the ground, as workers strike back in many different cities, and we'll have announcements as we go.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on, Kshama.
Thank you so much for having me. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, guys. Always a good time to talk to Kshama. Always a wealth of information.